Hi, in this video I will tell you how I would have read microeconomics from Varian for the preparation of MSQE, and I would also tell you the challenges which I am kind of facing for making these Varian lectures, and that is why it is taking a lot of time. So how would I read microeconomics from Varian for MSQE or other economics entrances? What I would resort to is first I will read the chapter 1, then I will solve the end of the chapter questions, and then I will go on to chapter 2, solve the end of the chapter questions, and so on. After I have solved, say, roughly 5 or 6 chapters, I would go on to solve the questions from Varian workbook. I will take bunches of these 5-6 chapters and complete the whole variant book. Then I will look at the previous year question papers and then try to understand which are the things which I am not able to get. That is where I will understand my blind spots, my weaknesses, or my strengths. And then I will recalibrate my preparation strategy. And then I will try to pick up Nicholson, Snyder, or some other book. But the key point here is I need to be sure about my weaknesses, strengths, and blind spots. Now, how do I do that? So, whenever I'm solving a previous year MSQE question, I will take that question and dissect it completely. I've already told a lot about this, that I take a question and I break it down into a lot of pieces. And all those pieces can be also made as individual questions. And if I just give you a bit of background, just the two videos which I have shot previous to this video about expected utility of money and risk analytics, that essentially is like a foundation for one question. Now, I could have made a video on a numerical based on risk analytics or expected utility of money, but I did not want to make that because that is something which is not usually asked in MSQE, but that does not mean it will never be asked. It could be asked. But yes, that was not my intention of making that video. I just wanted to discuss about why rich people remain rich and poor remain poor. So that was my basic premise over there. But if I had wanted to turn that situation into a numerical problem for MSQE entrance, then I would have given it a slightly different treatment. But still the thought process will remain more or less the same. I will go through the same steps one by one, and it will cover 3-4 videos. So that's the thing which you need to understand. If ever I will solve an MSQE question, one question will go on to 3-4 videos because I will dissect that question completely. But to get to that stage, I need to first cover few basic chapters in Variant. So that is the thing which I will do. So that is my process now, Variant chapters. Now, while shooting the Variant chapters, what's happening is, as you can see, I'm shooting from a MacBook's webcam, and it's rested on a tripod. So I can show you what's happening over here, but the board is quite small over here, and I have to adjust the camera or adjust something in the editing process, and things are usually not that clear to someone who is watching those videos because the letters, the numbers, and the symbols are not clearly visible. So that is my challenge. I do not want to spend a lot of my energy on substandard quality videos. So let me figure out the production quality settings which I need, and then I will resort to a good pace of Variant lectures, because lectures will be something which will be not out of context for a long amount of time. So I do not want to shoot a lot of lectures with this kind of a setting. I want to move towards a different setting. That is why I have reduced the speed of Variant lectures. Rather, I have not even picked up my speed on Variant lectures. So whenever I get that stable kind of production setting, I will move on to a stable kind of a speed in Variant lectures. Plus, reading Variant chapters and thinking of it as a few videos or one video is also a bit of time taking task. And as you've already seen that I have made a lot of MSQE question paper analysis videos and also a Google spreadsheet on that. And yes, if you haven't checked that video, check it out now. And people are asking a lot of questions on that, so I have to respond to a lot of comments on emails. So that's a thing. So without wasting any of your time, I will start this lecture. But yes, I wanted to give this basic background, or else you would not know what is the context behind what I am doing and why I am doing. So let's start this chapter, budget constraint. In economics or microeconomics, we always think that consumers choose the best bundle of goods or best set of goods which they can afford. Now, the thing over here is what they can afford. That is something which we need to discuss in this chapter, the budget constraint. The set of goods or the consumption bundle is something which we want to arrive at, but for that we need to first understand the budget constraint. What exactly is this constraint all about? And as you might have understood from the word constraint, it is kind of a restriction on the consumer. So let's understand this restriction. So over here you can see that you have two goods, x1 and x2. So when I say this, it means a consumption bundle of x1 units of good 1 and x2 units of good 2. Now P1 and P2 is the price of good 1 and price of good 2. M is the amount of money which you have, your income or wealth or whatever the case may be for that consumption. This is something which you will expend, because this is the expenditure on your good 1. So if I take this total amount, this is the expenditure on good 1 and good 2. And obviously you cannot spend more than what you have. So your expenditure must be less than equal to your availability of funds or your income or your wealth or that period's income. So this is your budget constraint, P1x1 plus P2x2 less than equal to M. Now you may ponder that we only have two goods, good 1 and good 2. But you may ask that consumers do not always buy two goods. They buy three goods, four goods, five goods and so on. And how do we counter that over here? See, on a general case, you may say that let's just change this budget constraint to accommodate n goods, which means P1x1 plus P2x2 and so on till Pn(xn) less than equal to m. But is it really needed? I mean, can't we do any rigorous analysis based on this equation, or we need this kind of a general framework? Now, let's think about it deeply. Let us say you're spending around 40% of your money on food and rest of the other goods are bought using 60% of money, and you are like spending all of your money, all M. In that case, we can do something smart. Let's say x1 is your food and x2 is everything else. And whenever I say everything else, I can smartly say that the price is 1. So this can also be rewritten as P1x1 plus x2 is less than equal to m. And when I write this, what I am saying is that P1 is the price of good 1 and good 2 represents the composite of all the goods, or I can say the expenditure on all the other goods. Think of it like this way. Let us suppose your good 1 is food and you are spending all of your food money on one food, which is pizza, or let's say potato chips. So good 1, which is pizza for you, or potato chips, you are consuming x1 units of that. Let me label it as food only because somebody might like something else, not pizza. And good 2 is everything else. So x2 denotes the expenditure on everything else. So what will be the price of everything else? Now you may ask that price of everything else will change, but I am not looking at the units. This is my expenditure on everything else, and this is my units of consumption. So units time price of 1, this gives you expenditure on your food or pizza. But for your good 2, I'm not considering the price. I'm assuming price equal to 1 and taking x2 as the direct expenditure. So you get the drift that let's say if you have 100 rupees and you're spending 40 rupees on your food and 60 rupees on your non-food items, and your 40 rupees is spent in, let us say you're consuming x1 is equal to 20 and the price of 1 unit is equal to 2. So 2 cross 20 is 40 and your 60 cross 1 is equal to 60. So 60 plus 40 is 100, which is kind of satisfying your constraint. So two goods are enough for analyzing any kind of a budget constraint on your goods. So that's the idea. No matter how many goods you are buying, you are consuming, we can just resort to this simple equation: P1 x1 plus P2 x2 is equal to M. Or if you want to have the inequality case, P1 x1 plus P2 x2 less than equal to M. Now this less than equal to is your budget constraint, and whenever I have full consumption or rather full utilization of money, I can just replace the inequality and say P1 x1 plus P2 x2 is equal to M. So even that is your budget constraint, but that is a particular case in which you are spending all of your money. So that's the idea over here. So this was the basic start of your budget constraint. Let me draw this budget constraint: P1 x1 plus P2 x2 less than equal to M. Then we'll understand what kind of situation we are getting ourselves into. Now let us suppose you are spending all of your money in good 1. So this becomes your big 0, this second term over here, and P1 x1 is less than equal to M, or x1 is less than equal to M by P1, right? So what I'm saying is this: let us say you're spending all of money in good 1. So in that case, your P1 x1 plus 0 will be less than equal to your M. So x1 will be less than equal to M by P1, and let's say you're consuming only good 1. So in that case, this point will be M upon P1, and similar analysis will give you this point, which is M upon P2. Now if you are smart enough, you will understand that this is the equation of a straight line. So let's just connect these points. Now this really is not an equation of a straight line, but this is, if I just remove the inequality, then it becomes an equation of a straight line. So I'll come to the inequality part in a bit, but let's just try to understand whether our assumption of straight line is right or wrong with a bit of modification on this line. Let's assume we remove the inequality sign and take the M over here in the denominator of this, which means I'm removing the inequality and dividing throughout by M. So this equation then will change into x1 upon M by P1 plus x2 upon M by P2 is equal to 1, because I have removed the inequality. I'm just checking the equality case. So x1 by this plus x2 by this is equal to 1, which is an equation of a straight line in the intercept form. Over here you can simply say x1 intercept and x2 intercept. In your coordinate geometry, we say this is your x-intercept, this is your y-intercept. But over here, this is your x1 intercept, this is your x2 intercept. So you get the idea over here how we have drawn this straight line. But we do not have equality, we have inequality, which means to draw this budget constraint, we have to shade this. Now there is a subtlety involved over here that all the consumer can do is only buy goods. So you can say x1 is greater than 0 and x2 is also greater than 0. Rather you can say greater than equal to 0. That is why we'll only consider the first quadrant. So this shaded region becomes your budget set. This is the set from which you can buy, and this set, budget set, is giving you the idea of budget constraint as well, that you can only choose consumption bundles from this region, shaded region. So this is the whole idea of budget constraint. This is your budget set, the shaded region. The line which I have drawn is your budget line, and any point on this shaded region is your consumption bundle, right, which you can afford. Now before I move forward, let me just remind you that when I was thinking in terms of P1 x1 plus x2 less than equal to m, this x2 was your all the other goods. You can think of it as a composite good. See, this word is not really important as well as an economic concept, but yes, you should know a bit of jargons in microeconomics because that will help you in relating with the concepts. So whenever I am doing an analysis in which all the other goods are collapsed in good 2, right, that good 2 is becomes your composite good, which means expenditure on all the other goods except good 1. So now we have completed budget constraint. Now let's move to few properties of budget constraint. Now we will do all the analysis for budget line, not the budget set. So only the straight line over here. So the equation of that straight line you can recall is P1 x1 plus P2 x2 is equal to m, or you can manipulate it to x1 upon m by P1 plus x2 upon m by P2 is equal to 1. Or you can do a further manipulation. How? You can say P2 x2 is equal to minus P1 x1 plus m. I have just taken this to the right hand side. So your x2 will become equal to minus of P1 upon P2 into x1 plus m by P2. Now this is a quite familiar piece of thing which you might have come across in coordinate geometry. This you can think of as y is equal to your capital mx plus c, right? Now you can say your x2 is your y, this kind of a guy is your m, which is your slope, and this m upon P2 is your y-intercept. So over here we do not have y, we have x2. So you can say that x2 intercept is m upon P2 and your slope is minus P1 upon P2. Minus because you see that this is a downward sloping line. So a downward sloping line would have a negative slope. And there's a significance of this slope. Now what do we know about this slope? So let me just erase out these parts and then we'll move on to slope. But before that, let's just be on the same page. This was the budget line. We have gone from the inequality situation to the equality situation. We can modify it to this form, which will help us in correlating with these intercept values. Then we can also make it into y is equal to mx plus c, where m is your slope, which is a minus P1 upon P2, and C is your y-intercept. Over here we do not have a y, we have an x2. So m upon P2 is your y or x2 intercept. So we will now talk about this slope, but first I'll erase this and magnify this diagram. This is your budget line and this is the slope of the budget line. Now there is a significance of this slope. This is denoting your rate of substitution between good 1 and good 2. Now how do we think about it? Let us say your graph over here is giving you some slope. For example, it's minus 20, which means minus 20 is equal to minus, which means price of good 1 is higher, 20 times more than price of good 2. So naturally, if you have to buy good 1, you will have to forego a lot of good 2, which means you have to give up a lot of good 2 to buy more of good 1. Let's think about it in a graph. Let us say you are at this point and you want to consume more of good 1. So you need to move right. but you cannot just move right, you also have to come down to get into this your budget line. So this movement is only allowed along the line right and down. So if the slope is very high in negative sense, which means a minus 100 is a very high slope, right, and a minus 2 is a less slope, because we are thinking in terms of absolute numbers over here. So if I have to give you that the slope over here is 20, which I have told you over here, minus 20. Now what is the slope? The slope essentially measures your delta y by delta x, right? You can also think of this as delta x2 upon delta x1. So I have given you minus 20. So this guy over here is equal to minus 20, which means to say that delta x2 is equal to minus 20 times delta x1. So if you say that delta x1 is 1, positive 1, which means I'm increasing the consumption of good 1, in that case your delta x2 will become minus 20 into 1, which means you have to reduce your consumption of good 2 by 20 units, which means if you have to consume more of good 1 by 1 unit, you'll have to consume less of good 2 by 20 units. That's the idea behind your opportunity cost. This is also thought in terms of opportunity cost, or the rate at which you are substituting good 1 for good 2 or good 2 for good 1, whatever be the case which you are trying to visualize over here. Over here I was thinking in terms of more of good 1 in place of less of good 2. So if you have to consume extra amount of good 1, you'll have to consume less of good 2, and that is exactly equal to your slope, right, which is your minus p1 upon p2. So this minus p1 upon p2 gives you the amount of good 2 which you will have to forego to consume more of good 1 unit more of good 1. So this is the idea or your significance or the economic interpretation of your slope of the budget line. Now let's move on to how we can change this budget line dependent on the changes in prices and your income. Let's look at that in a different diagram. Let us consider your original budget line equation. P1 x1 plus P2 x2 is equal to m, and let's put numbers to it. Let's say your P1 is 2 and P2 is 3, and let us suppose m is your 48. So let's draw this line. 2x1 plus 3x2 is equal to 48. A simple way to do this would be convert it to intercept form. x1 upon 48 by 2 plus x2 upon 48 by 3 is equal to 1, which means x1 by 24 plus x2 by 16 is equal to 1. So this will become your line. This 1 will be your 24 or 48 by 2, and this will be your 16 or 48 by 3. This is x1, this is x2. What happens if in place of 48 I give you m equal to 54? So let me increase m from 48 to 54. So what will happen to these guys? This will change from 48 by 2 to 54 by 2, and this will change from 48 by 3 to 54 by 3, right? So this will go on from 24 to 27, and this will go from 16 to 54 by 3, which is 18. Now you can just check the slope again. Slope earlier was minus p1 by p2, which was minus 2 by 3. Again, I have not changed the price. So if the price has not changed, the slope will remain the same, right? So that's the idea of it here. Your slope will remain the same, but your points will move away which means you will have a parallel shifting. If I give you money and do not change the prices of goods, you will have a parallel shifting, which means either it will go up if I give you more money and it will go down if I take money from you. So this is parallel shifting in your budget line if I change your money or wealth or period income. What about prices? Prices over here is also not that difficult to capture. Let's just erase this and think about prices. So this is your budget line equation, and if I increase your price of P1 from P1 to P1 prime, right? You can think in terms of from 2 to 2.5, right? Which means your P1 prime by P1 is greater than 1, or 2.5 by 2 is greater than 1. So what will happen to your M by P1? Your M by P1 will move from M by P1 to M by P1 prime. So if you are increasing the denominator, definitely this number will fall, which means this will move to the left. Or you can simply think in terms of, if the price of good one increases and you want to spend all of your money on good one, you can buy lesser of good one because the price of good one has increased. But let's say you are not changing the price of good two, so this point will not change, but this point will change. So I'll just connect these 2 points. So whenever price of good one increases, this budget line will rotate in this direction, and whenever the price of good one reduces, this will move in this direction and your line will shift in that direction. This is for price increase of good one, and this is for price decrease of good one. And we can do the same thing for good 2 as well. It is identical. I mean, all the analysis can be just thought of what we have done for good 1 can be done for good 2 as well. Now over that analysis, you will keep this as fixed and this as moving, but the analysis will remain the same. So that was the idea behind budget constraint, properties of budget constraint, or your budget line, and few changes in the budget line depending upon the prices change and your income change. Now this was part 1 of the video on chapter 2 budget constraint. I do not want to bore you a lot and take a lot of your time, so I'll soon upload the part 2 of this video as well. Till now, I hope that you have understood a lot about budget constraint, budget line. So if you have liked this video and gained something out of it, do not forget to share with your friends who are preparing for MSQE. Like the video, and also do not forget to subscribe if you have not done already.